For most of modern history, the middle class represented stability, predictability, and the belief that disciplined work could gradually create a secure life. Yet over the past few decades, something subtle began to shift beneath the surface of everyday economics. And unlike sudden recessions or market crashes, this transformation happened slowly enough that many people only noticed it through feelings rather than headlines. People started working longer hours while feeling financially tighter. Salaries appeared larger on paper while purchasing power weakened in practice. And ordinary households found themselves making increasingly complex financial decisions simply to maintain lifestyles that earlier generations considered normal. What makes this shift difficult to fully recognize is that many of the visible signs of prosperity still exist. Consumer technology became cheaper. Entertainment became more accessible. Online services created the illusion of abundance. And modern economies continued producing convenience at extraordinary scale. Yet underneath that surface, several foundational pillars supporting middle-class stability quietly became more expensive at rates far above ordinary wage growth. Housing, education, healthcare, childcare, and retirement security all began separating from income growth in ways that fundamentally altered the economic pressure experienced by average families. A useful way to understand this transformation is to stop thinking about money as isolated prices and instead think in terms of energy required to maintain stability. In previous decades, a single stable income could often support housing ownership, raise children, build savings, and provide long-term security with relatively manageable financial strain. Today, even dual-income households frequently feel as though they are operating on narrow margins despite earning amounts that would have appeared substantial in earlier periods. The issue is not simply that everything became expensive, but that the structure of economic participation itself changed. One major force behind this transition is asset inflation. While consumer products often became cheaper due to globalization and technological efficiency, productive assets increased dramatically in value. Real estate, equities, premium urban land, and ownership stakes in scalable businesses appreciated far faster than wages. This distinction matters because labor income and asset ownership behave very differently over time. Labor typically grows incrementally through promotions or inflation adjustments, while assets compound asymmetrically because they participate directly in economic expansion, monetary policy, and investor demand. This mathematical reality quietly reshaped wealth distribution because households primarily dependent on wages experienced linear growth, while households owning appreciating assets experienced compounding growth. Over long periods, even modest differences in annual compounding create enormous separation. A family whose primary focus is maintaining monthly expenses operates inside an entirely different financial environment from a family whose assets continuously appreciate in the background regardless of daily labor. This helps explain why many middle-class households increasingly feel trapped between appearances and reality. On the surface, they may possess advanced technology, reliable transportation, subscription services, and access to modern conveniences unimaginable decades ago. Yet simultaneously feel financially fragile when facing medical emergencies, housing costs, education expenses, or temporary income disruption. The emotional confusion comes from the fact that visible consumption improved while structural ownership weakened. Another important force reshaping the middle class is the changing nature of labor itself. Industrial economies historically rewarded predictable specialization because large organizations depended heavily on stable long-term employment structures. Employees could often expect pensions, career ladders, and relatively durable institutional loyalty. Modern economies, however, increasingly reward adaptability, scalability, and technological leverage rather than simple consistency. Digital systems allow companies to scale output without scaling labor proportionally, which means productivity gains no longer translate into widespread wage growth as directly as they once did. This transition created a strange psychological contradiction. Workers are often more educated, more connected, and more technically skilled than previous generations, yet many simultaneously experience greater financial insecurity. The reason is that educational advancement alone no longer guarantees scarcity value in labor markets. As knowledge becomes widely accessible, competitive advantage shifts toward ownership, systems leverage, network effects, and capital allocation rather than credentials alone. At the same time, the middle class became deeply integrated into debt-driven consumption systems. Credit expansion allowed households to maintain lifestyles that wage growth alone could not fully support. Mortgages extended housing affordability temporarily by spreading payments across decades. Student loans expanded access to education while delaying financial independence. And consumer credit normalized the habit of financing present comfort with future income. None of these systems are inherently malicious, yet together they created an economy where many households appear financially stable while carrying significant long-term obligations beneath the surface. Historically, this pattern is not entirely new. During multiple periods of economic transition, societies experienced widening gaps between asset owners and wage earners. The Industrial Revolution created similar tensions as capital-intensive systems reorganized labor relationships. And during the late stages of various empires throughout history, concentration of productive ownership often accelerated while ordinary workers struggled to maintain purchasing power. What makes the modern period unique is the speed and scale enabled by global capital flows and digital infrastructure. The stock market provides one of the clearest examples of this divide. Over long periods, broad equity markets historically trended upward because they represent ownership in productive economic systems rather than direct labor participation. Someone consistently investing in diversified productive assets may experience wealth accumulation differently from someone relying entirely on salary growth, even if their incomes initially appear similar. Compounding behaves slowly at first and then accelerates disproportionately later, which is why wealth inequality often appears stable for years before becoming suddenly obvious. The early stages feel insignificant, but eventually the curve steepens enough that ownership structures dramatically outperform labor-based accumulation. This creates the widespread sensation that economic mobility is slowing even while economies continue growing overall. Psychologically, these conditions also alter human behavior. When financial pressure increases, people naturally prioritize short-term certainty over long-term optimization. Scarcity consumes cognitive bandwidth. Individuals operating under constant financial stress often make decisions focused on immediate relief rather than future leverage, not because they lack intelligence, but because uncertainty changes human time horizons. Behavioral economics repeatedly demonstrates that financial instability narrows planning capacity and increases sensitivity to immediate rewards. This is partly why wealth-building habits often appear deceptively simple from the outside. Long-term investing, delayed gratification, controlled spending, and disciplined saving sound straightforward conceptually, yet become psychologically difficult inside unstable environments. Economic systems do not merely influence bank balances. They shape emotional states, attention allocation, risk tolerance, and personal identity. The middle class is therefore not disappearing in a dramatic cinematic collapse, but evolving under new pressures that reward different behaviors than previous generations were taught to prioritize. Stability increasingly depends on financial adaptability, asset exposure, technological fluency, and the ability to participate in scalable systems rather than relying solely on predictable employment structures. The rules changed gradually enough that many people continued using strategies designed for earlier economic eras. This does not mean upward mobility is impossible, nor does it imply that economic outcomes are predetermined. It means the mechanisms driving wealth creation became more abstract, more financialized, and more dependent on ownership dynamics than many educational systems traditionally emphasized. Understanding this distinction changes how people interpret careers, savings, investing, housing decisions, and even time itself. In many ways, the defining economic question of the modern middle class is no longer simply how hard someone works, but whether their effort connects to systems capable of compounding over time. Two individuals can demonstrate equal discipline and equal intelligence while experiencing entirely different financial trajectories depending on whether they participate primarily in consumption systems or ownership systems. The quiet transformation of the middle class is ultimately a story about leverage, incentives, and adaptation. Economies evolved from industrial structures built around labor stability into global systems optimized around scalability and capital efficiency. The households that recognize this transition early tend to adjust their behavior gradually, while those expecting older economic patterns to return often experience growing frustration without fully understanding the structural forces involved. Perhaps the most important realization is that modern financial pressure is not always the result of personal failure, poor character, or lack of effort. Often it reflects participation in systems undergoing deep structural change. Once people recognize that distinction, financial decisions become less emotional and more strategic. The conversation shifts away from appearances and toward mechanics. Away from short-term signaling and toward long-term positioning. And away from reacting to economic systems toward understanding how those systems actually function.